Sofia Martinez stood in the bustling international terminal, clutching her boarding pass as if it were a lifeline. The 25-year-old artisan from the small coastal town of Puerto Viejo had never seen such a vast space filled with so many hurrying people. The soaring glass ceilings and endless rows of check-in counters made her feel smaller than ever before. Gate C15, she muttered to herself, scanning the signs above. Her sister Elena's wedding gift, a business-class ticket to New York, felt almost like a cruel joke. How could someone raised in a community of craftsmen and small shop owners possibly belong in such luxury? The terminal's glossy floors reflected the morning sun, creating patterns that reminded Sofia of the waves back home, where she spent her days helping run her family's small beachfront inn. The same inn that had been in their family for 3 generations, along with dozens of other family-owned businesses that gave Puerto Viejo its charm. When she finally found her seat on the plane, Sofia's heart nearly stopped. The leather chair was wider than any armchair she'd ever seen, with buttons and controls that looked more complicated than her old laptop. But it wasn't the seat that made her pulse quicken. It was the man sitting in the window seat next to hers. He wore a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than her family's inn made in a month. His strong jawline and perfectly trimmed dark beard framed features that seemed carved from stone. When he glanced up from his laptop, his deep brown eyes met hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "Excuse me," Sofia managed to say, gesturing awkwardly to her seat. He stood in one fluid motion, his height making her feel even more diminutive. As she settled into her seat, she could feel his presence beside her, like a force field of authority and wealth. The flight attendant offered them champagne before takeoff. Sofia politely declined, while her seatmate accepted without looking up from his screen. She snuck a glance at his laptop. Spreadsheets and blueprints filled the display, along with what looked like architectural renderings of a massive resort complex. As the plane began to taxi, Sofia's nerves finally got the better of her. She'd never flown before, and the sensation of movement sent her heart racing. She gripped the armrests, her knuckles turning white. That's when she felt it, the first pocket of turbulence. Without thinking, Sofia grabbed the nearest thing to steady herself, which happened to be her seatmate's arm. She felt his muscles tense under her fingers and immediately tried to pull away, mortified. But before she could, his other hand came to rest gently over hers. "First time flying?" His voice was deep and smooth, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. When she dared to look up, she found him watching her with an expression that had softened from its earlier severity. "Is it that obvious?" Sofia managed a shaky laugh, very aware that her hand was still under his. "I was the same way once," he said, though Sofia found that hard to believe. "I'm Alexander Karim. And you are?" "Sofia Martinez," she replied, finally finding the courage to meet his gaze directly. "I'm heading to New York for my sister's wedding." "New York?" His eyebrow arched slightly. "That's where I'm based, though I spend most of my time traveling for business." As the plane leveled off, Sofia found herself relaxing, drawn into conversation with Alexander. He asked about her hometown, and she found herself telling him about Puerto Viejo's beautiful beaches, the local artisans, and the way tourists fell in love with its authentic charm. "It sounds beautiful," Alexander said, though something flickered in his eyes that Sofia couldn't quite read. "The kind of place that deserves to be preserved." Sofia nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly it. We don't have luxury resorts or fancy restaurants, but people come back year after year because it's real. It's home." For a moment, Alexander seemed lost in thought. Then he turned to her with an unexpected question. "Would you like to see New York through local eyes? I know the city well, and it seems a shame for you to experience it only through tourist attractions." Sofia hesitated. Everything she knew about safety and strangers told her to decline politely. But something in Alexander's expression made her pause. There was a sincerity there, and perhaps a touch of loneliness that resonated with her own feelings of being out of place in this world of luxury. "I have 2 days before the wedding," she heard herself say, "but I wouldn't want to impose on your work schedule." Let me worry about that, Alexander replied, reaching for his phone. Sometimes the most important business decisions come from unexpected perspectives. The morning after their flight, Sophia found herself standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's corner office, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. The city stretched before her like a forest of glass and steel, so different from the gentle coastline of Puerto Viejo. She was still trying to process how she'd ended up here, in the headquarters of Karim International Holdings. Coffee. Alexander's voice brought her back to reality. He'd shed his suit jacket, and the crisp white shirt emphasized his broad shoulders. Or perhaps tea. Coffee, please, Sophia replied, turning away from the window. This view is incredible. It is, he agreed, handing her a porcelain cup. Though sometimes I wonder if we've built our towers so high that we've lost sight of the ground. There was something in his tone that made Sophia look at him more closely. Despite his obvious wealth and power, she sensed a restlessness in him, a questioning that seemed at odds with his commanding presence. Before we explore the city, Alexander said, settling into one of the leather chairs, I'd like to hear more about Puerto Viejo. You mentioned your family owns an inn. Sophia's face lit up as she described the Villa Marina, the small beachfront property her grandparents had built from scratch. It's not fancy, but every room has a story. Tourists love how my mother decorates each one with local artworks, and my father knows every guest by name. And it's profitable? Alexander's question seemed casual, but his eyes were sharp. We do well enough, Sophia replied carefully. The whole town works together. The restaurants recommend our inn. We send guests to the local shops and tour guides. It's not about getting rich. It's about community. Alexander nodded, but Sophia noticed him glancing at something on his desk, what looked like a folder marked Coastal Development Initiative. Before she could get a better look, he smoothly shifted it out of view. Shall we begin our tour? He asked, standing. I thought we'd start with some hidden gems in Greenwich Village, places tourists rarely find. The next few hours were like stepping into another world. Alexander led her through narrow streets lined with brownstones, pointing out historical details she would have missed. They ducked into a tiny bookstore, where the owner greeted Alexander by name, and he insisted on buying Sophia a collection of New York poetry when he caught her admiring it. Over lunch at a hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese restaurant, Sophia found herself sharing more about her life. Elena, my sister who's getting married, she always wanted the big city life, but I never felt that pull. In Puerto Viejo, I know who I am. And who is that? Alexander asked, his expression genuinely curious. Someone who believes in preserving what matters, Sophia replied. In a world that's always racing forward, sometimes we need places that remind us to slow down. Something flickered across Alexander's face. Was it guilt? But before Sophia could analyze it, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. I need to take this, he said, standing. Would you excuse me for a moment? Sophia nodded, watching as he stepped outside the restaurant. Through the window, she could see him pacing, his expression growing more intense. She couldn't hear his words, but his body language spoke of conflict. When he returned, there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. I apologize, but something has come up at the office. Would you mind if we made a brief stop there before continuing our tour? Back at Karim International, Alexander led Sophia to a conference room with the same stunning views as his office. Please make yourself comfortable. I shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. But as Sophia waited, she couldn't help but overhear voices from the adjacent room. The walls were thick, but the air vent carried fragments of conversation. The Puerto Viejo acquisition. Locals resistant. Timeline accelerated. Sophia's heart stopped. Puerto Viejo acquisition? She moved closer to the vent, straining to hear more. Alexander, you need to sign off on this today. Once we announce the resort development, property values will skyrocket. Small businesses won't be able to afford to stay. That's the point. The voice speaking to Alexander was sharp, calculating, but it was Alexander's response that made Sophia's blood run cold. The displacement projections are acceptable. Proceed with the announcements. Sophia stumbled back from the vent, her mind reeling. The man who had spent the day showing her the hidden soul of New York was the same one plotting to destroy her hometown's heart. The architectural plans she'd glimpsed on his laptop, the probing questions about the inn's finances, it all suddenly made terrible sense. When Alexander returned to the conference room, he found Sophia standing by the window, her back to him. "Ready to continue our tour?" Sophia turned and Alexander froze at the sight of her expression. In her eyes he saw something that cut deeper than anger, disappointment. Was any of it real? Sophia's voice cut through the silence of the conference room. The tour, the conversations, your interest in Puerto Viejo's community, was it all just research for your development project? Alexander's composed exterior cracked slightly. He took a step forward, then stopped when Sophia backed away. "Sophia, business is complex. There are factors you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're going to destroy everything my family, my community, has spent generations building. And you spent the day pretending to care about preservation while planning to tear it all down. The resort will bring jobs, economic growth." "Growth?" Sophia laughed bitterly. "You mean pricing out local businesses so you can replace them? With luxury boutiques, turning our family inns into parking lots for your five-star hotel." Alexander moved to his desk, pulling out the folder she'd noticed earlier. "Look at these projections. The development will increase property values by—" "That's exactly the problem," Sophia's eyes flashed. "Our community doesn't want inflated property values. We want our homes, our businesses, our way of life. But you can't understand that, can you? Everything's just numbers on a spreadsheet to you." For the first time since she'd met him, Alexander seemed at a loss for words. He stood there, the folder hanging limply in his hand, staring at Sophia as if seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. "I thought—" Sophia's voice softened, heavy with disappointment. "I thought I saw something in you today. Someone who understood the value of hidden bookstores and family-run restaurants. Someone who could see beyond profit margins." Alexander set the folder down, running a hand through his perfectly groomed hair. "Sophia, this project has been in development for years. Millions have already been invested. I can't just— Can't? Or won't?" She moved to the window, looking out at the city he'd shown her just hours ago. "You showed me New York's soul today. All those small businesses and local communities that make it special. How can you appreciate that here but be willing to destroy it in Puerto Viejo?" A knock at the door interrupted them. A sharp-featured man in an expensive suit entered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Sophia. "Alexander, the board is waiting for your signature on the Puerto Viejo documents." "Marcus," Alexander acknowledged his cousin tensely. "I'll be there shortly." But Marcus didn't leave. Instead, he studied Sophia with calculating eyes. "You must be from Puerto Viejo. Alexander, I didn't realize you were conducting personal interviews with the locals." The contempt in his voice made Sophia's spine stiffen. "I was just leaving," she said, gathering her dignity. "I have a wedding to prepare for, after all." She headed for the door, then paused, turning back to Alexander. "You know what the saddest part is? When you showed me those hidden corners of New York, I saw a man who could look beyond surface value, someone who might understand that real wealth isn't always measured in dollars." Alexander took a step toward her. "Sophia, wait." "The car is waiting to take you to your hotel, Miss Martinez," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "We wouldn't want to keep you from your sister's wedding preparations." Sophia lifted her chin, meeting Alexander's troubled gaze one last time. "Goodbye, Mr. Karim. I hope your resort brings you all the profit you're looking for." As she walked out of Karim International's gleaming headquarters, Sophia felt tears threatening to fall. But she wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. Her family needed to know what was coming. They had to prepare, to fight. Back in the conference room, Alexander stood motionless, staring at the door Sophia had just walked through. Marcus's voice seemed to come from far away. "The board is waiting, cousin. It's time to sign off on the future of Karim International." Alexander turned to the window, seeing the city with new eyes. every skyscraper, every luxury hotel his company had built suddenly felt hollow. He thought of Sophia's words about hidden bookstores and family restaurants, about communities that valued something more than profit. Alexander? Marcus's impatient voice cut through his thoughts. The papers need your signature. But Alexander wasn't seeing the papers. He was seeing Sophia's face when she'd first described her family's inn, the pride and love in her eyes. He was remembering the warmth of the Vietnamese restaurant owner who'd greeted him like family, the passion of the bookstore keeper who knew every volume by heart. For the first time in his career, Alexander Karim found himself questioning everything he'd been taught about success. The next morning, Alexander sat in his penthouse office, the Puerto Viejo development papers still unsigned on his desk. He hadn't slept, Sophia's words, echoing in his mind. The sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, but he barely noticed the view he'd paid millions for. His phone buzzed again, the 10th call from Marcus since last night. He ignored it, instead pulling up the detailed plans for Puerto Viejo on his computer. What he'd always seen as progress now looked different. The sleek renderings of the luxury resort complex seemed to mock the vibrant community Sophia had described. Mr. Karim, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your cousin Marcus is here. Before Alexander could respond, Marcus burst into the office, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. What the hell are you doing? The board is waiting for those signatures. Our investors are getting nervous. I'm reviewing the environmental impact studies, Alexander replied calmly, though his heart was racing. And the community displacement projections. Marcus stared at him incredulously. Since when do you care about displacement projections? That girl got to you, didn't she? She made me see something I've been blind to, Alexander admitted, standing to face his cousin. We're not just building a resort. We're destroying a community. That's business, Marcus slammed his hand on the desk. We've done this dozens of times. Buy out the local properties, transform the area, multiply our investment. It's what your father built this company on. Alexander walked to the window, remembering how Sophia had stood there just yesterday. Maybe it's time to build something different. Meanwhile, in her hotel room, Sophia was on a video call with her parents, tears streaming down her face as she explained what she'd discovered. Her father's weathered face grew grave while her mother clutched her rosary. Mama, Papa, we have to fight this, Sophia insisted. We can't let them destroy everything we've built. Mihija, her father sighed. We've heard rumors about developers, but Karim International, they're too powerful. How can we stand against them? Together, Sophia declared, her voice stronger. I'll talk to Elena. We'll postpone the wedding preparations. This is more important. No, her mother interrupted firmly. Your sister's wedding must go on. Joy is as important as struggle, Sophia. We'll find a way to fight, but we won't let them take this happiness from our family. As Sophia ended the call, her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. Meeting tonight. 8 p.m. Greenwich Village Bookstore. She stared at the message, her heart pounding. After everything, what could Alexander possibly have to say? Back at Karim International, Alexander was deep in research, reviewing years of development projects. Each one showed the same pattern. Local communities displaced, cultural heritage erased, all in the name of profit. Had he really been so blind? Your father would be ashamed, Marcus spat, pacing the office. He built this empire by never letting sentiment cloud his judgment. Alexander's head snapped up. My father built this empire by destroying others' dreams. I won't continue that legacy. You don't have a choice, Marcus's voice turned cold. The board won't accept any changes to the Puerto Viejo project. Sign the papers, or I'll call for a vote of no confidence. You'll lose everything. Maybe. I need to lose everything to find something worth having, Alexander replied quietly. As evening approached, Sophia stood outside the small bookstore where Alexander had bought her the poetry collection just yesterday. Through the window, she could see him waiting, his usual perfect posture betraying signs of tension. She almost turned away. What was the point? He'd made his choice clear, but something in his message, in the choice of this location, made her pause. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door, the familiar smell of old books washing over her. Alexander looked up, relief flooding his features. He'd shed his usual suit for simple slacks and a sweater, making him look somehow more human, more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I need to show you something." He led her to a table where dozens of documents were spread out. Sophia recognized architectural plans, but these were different from the ones she'd glimpsed before. "I spent all night working on this," Alexander explained, his voice urgent. "A new vision for Puerto Viejo. Not a resort that destroys the community, but one that grows from it, working with local businesses, preserving the culture, enhancing what's already there instead of replacing it." Sophia's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to remain cautious. "Why should I believe you?" Alexander met her gaze directly. "Because you were right about everything, and I need your help to make this right." Sophia leaned over the new blueprints, her heart racing as she absorbed the details of Alexander's vision. Instead of demolishing the existing inns and shops, the plans showed them integrated into a broader development that preserved Puerto Viejo's character while adding modern amenities. The existing businesses would become partners, not casualties, Alexander explained, his fingers tracing the lines on the paper. "Your family's inn, for example, could be renovated and expanded, but keep its original charm. We'd provide training, marketing support, access to our booking systems." "And the other families?" Sophia asked, thinking of her neighbors, the people she'd grown up with. "What about their businesses?" "Same concept." Alexander moved to another drawing. "The local restaurants would be featured attractions, not replaced. We'd create a cultural center showcasing local artisans. The goal is to enhance, not erase." Sophia wanted to believe him, the passion in his voice, the thoughtfulness of the plans. It all spoke to the man she'd glimpsed during their tour of New York, but doubt still nagged at her. "You're bored, your cousin. They'll never agree to this." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You're right. Marcus has already threatened to force me out if I don't sign the original plans. But I've been doing some research." He pulled out another stack of documents. "The company bylaws give me more power than they realize. If I can prove this alternative approach is financially viable, they can't stop me." "Is it viable?" Sophia asked, her practical nature asserting itself. "That's where you come in," Alexander said, meeting her eyes. "I need someone who understands the community, who can help me refine this vision. Someone who can be a bridge between Karim International and Puerto Viejo." Before Sophia could respond, the bookstore's elderly owner, Mr. Chen, approached with 2 cups of tea. "Thought you might need these, been watching you two pour over those papers for hours." Alexander accepted the tea gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Your shop, it's given me a lot to think about lately." The old man smiled, knowingly. Sometimes we need to step into a different world to see our own clearly." He glanced at the blueprints. "Reminds me of when developers wanted to tear down this block. Everyone said small bookstores were obsolete. But here we are, still standing, still serving the community." After Mr. Chen walked away, Sophia studied Alexander's profile. How did this bookstore survive? "A group of local business owners banded together," Alexander replied. "They proved that preserving the neighborhood's character was more valuable than another luxury development. It's one of the case studies I want to present to the board." Sophia's phone buzzed. A message from Elena about wedding preparations. Reality came crashing back. "The wedding's in 2 days. Even if I wanted to help, there's no time." "Stay," Alexander said suddenly. "After the wedding, help me make this work." When Sophia hesitated, he continued, "I know I haven't earned your trust, but this isn't just about me anymore. It's about finding a better way forward." Just then, the bookstore's door chimed. Marcus strode in, looking utterly out of place among the worn wooden shelves and vintage volumes. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Sophia. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said to Alexander. "The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Your little revolution ends there." Alexander stood, his full height matching his cousin's challenging stance. Perfect timing, I'll present my alternative proposal. Marcus laughed coldly. You think they'll choose your feel-good community project over guaranteed profits? Wake up, cousin. This isn't a fairy tale. No, Alexander replied calmly. It's the future. The days of destroying communities for profit are over. If the board can't see that, maybe they need new leadership. You're willing to risk everything, Marcus demanded. Your position, your inheritance, your entire future. For what? Some small-town inn and a girl you just met. Sophia stood, gathering the blueprints. I should go. Stay, Alexander said again, not taking his eyes off Marcus. Please, we're not finished here. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You're making a huge mistake, Alexander. Don't throw away everything your father built. I'm not throwing it away, Alexander replied. I'm transforming it into something better, something sustainable. He turned to Sophia. But I can't do it alone. Sophia looked between the two men, one representing the cold, profit-driven world she'd always feared would destroy her home, the other showing her a glimpse of how that same power could be used to protect and nurture communities instead of destroying them. The choice she made next would change not just her life, but the future of Puerto Viejo and perhaps the very way development projects were approached in communities like hers around the world. The morning of the board meeting dawned grey and rainy. Sophia sat in Alexander's office, helping him prepare his presentation. They'd worked through the night, fueled by coffee and determination, crafting a vision that could bridge two worlds. These profit projections, Sophia said, pointing to a spreadsheet on his laptop. They're actually higher than the original plan's long-term estimates. Alexander nodded, loosening his tie slightly. Sustainable development creates lasting value, but convincing old-school investors to see beyond immediate returns, he trailed off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Sophia stood and walked to him, straightening his tie with gentle hands. You've built an ironclad case. The numbers support the vision. Now you just have to make them feel it. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of their shared mission gave way to something more personal. Alexander caught her hand before she could step away. Thank you, he said softly, for believing this is possible. A knock at the door broke the moment. Alexander's assistant entered, looking anxious. Sir, the board members are arriving, but there's something you should know. Mr. Marcus has been meeting with them individually all morning. Sophia felt Alexander tense beside her. He's trying to turn them against the proposal before they even see it. Then we'll make them see it so. Clearly they can't look away, Sophia declared, her voice stronger than she felt. She picked up a small wooden box from his desk, a handcrafted piece from one of Puerto Viejo's artisans that she'd had rushed to New York overnight. Sometimes you need to touch something real to understand its value. As they walked toward the boardroom, Marcus intercepted them. Cousin, be reasonable. I've arranged a graceful way for you to step down, retire to one of our European properties, maintain your lifestyle. Don't humiliate yourself with this community development fantasy. The only fantasy, Alexander replied, is believing we can continue destroying communities for profit and call it progress. He turned to Sophia. Ready? She squeezed his hand quickly. Ready. The boardroom was intimidating. 20 stern faces around a massive mahogany table all turned to watch Alexander walk in. Sophia took a seat in the back, the wooden box clutched in her lap. Members of the board, Alexander began, his voice steady. Today I'm presenting not just an alternative development plan, but a new vision for Kareem International's future. For the next hour, he laid out their proposal. The numbers were compelling. Sustainable growth, steady returns, positive press coverage translating to increased property values across their portfolio. But it was when he opened Sophia's box that the energy in the room shifted. Inside were photos of Puerto Viejo's families, artisan crafts, handwritten stories of generations building their businesses. Alexander passed them around the table. This is what we've been calling obsolete. This is what we've been erasing. But what if, instead of destroying it, we helped it grow? One board member, an elderly woman, held up a hand-carved figurine. My grandmother had something like this. before developers tore down her neighborhood in Buenos Aires. Exactly, Alexander said. We've all seen communities vanish in the name of progress. But today we have a choice to do something different. To be the company that proves luxury and local culture can coexist and thrive together. Marcus stood up, his face flushed. This is absurd. We're not a charity. The Puerto Viejo project was set to be our most profitable development this year. Was it? Sophia spoke up from the back of the room. All heads turned to her. Mr. Karim, may I? Alexander nodded, and Sophia walked to the presentation screen. I've spent the last 12 hours analyzing your original projections. They don't account for local resistance, negative publicity, or the long-term cost of maintaining an artificial environment that tourists increasingly reject in favor of authentic experiences. She pulled up a new slide. Our alternative plan shows higher profits by year 3, with sustainable growth that doesn't depend on constantly finding new communities to transform. We're not asking you to choose between profit and preservation. We're showing you how to achieve both. The board members began murmuring among themselves. The elderly woman spoke up again. Mr. Karim, your father built this company on a certain vision, but perhaps it's time for that vision to evolve. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. This is emotional manipulation. She has no business being here. On the contrary, another board member said, Miss Martinez represents exactly what we've been missing. Genuine connection to the communities we impact. I move to vote on the alternative proposal. As the board members raised their hands one by one, Sophia felt her heart racing. Alexander stood tall, his expression unreadable. This vote wouldn't just decide the fate of Puerto Viejo. It would determine the future of everything Alexander had inherited and everything he hoped to build. The board's decision was clear. 14 votes in favor of the new vision, 6 against. As the members filed out of the boardroom, some stopping to congratulate Alexander or express interest in the details of the community partnership model, Sophia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. They'd done it. Puerto Viejo would survive. And more than that, it would grow stronger. Marcus was the last to leave, his face a mask of cold fury. This isn't over, cousin. The shareholders won't stand for this idealistic nonsense. The shareholders, Alexander replied calmly, will see the value when we prove this model works. Change is coming, Marcus. You can either adapt or get left behind. After everyone had gone, Sophia and Alexander stood alone in the empty boardroom. The morning's rain had cleared and sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in golden beams. I still can't believe it, Sophia whispered. We actually did it. Alexander turned to her, his professional facade finally cracking to reveal genuine emotion. No, you did it. Your passion, your understanding of what really matters, that's what convinced them. I just provided the platform. We did it together, Sophia corrected him, gathering the photos and crafts from the table. Her fingers lingered on a family portrait. But this is just the beginning, isn't it? Now we have to make it work. About that, Alexander said, his voice hesitant for the first time she could remember. I know you have your sister's wedding tomorrow, but after that, I meant what I said about needing your help. Would you consider taking on an official role in the project? Sophia looked up, surprised. What kind of role? Community Development Director, Alexander replied. You'd be the bridge between Karim International and Puerto Viejo, ensuring we stay true to our promises. Full autonomy, direct report to me, and, he smiled slightly, a salary that might help your family expand that inn of yours. Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed. Elena was calling. The wedding rehearsal dinner was in 3 hours and she hadn't even started getting ready. I have to go, she said apologetically. The rehearsal dinner? Of course, Alexander nodded. Take time to think about it, celebrate with your family. The offer will still be here. But as Sophia turned to leave, he caught her hand. Would you mind if I came to the wedding? Not as CEO of Karim International, just as someone who'd like to see you in a setting that doesn't involve boardrooms and business proposals. Sophia felt her heart skip. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." That evening, at the rehearsal dinner in one of New York's finest restaurants, Sophia found herself distracted. Elena was radiant with happiness. The room was filled with laughter and music, but Sophia's mind kept drifting to the job offer and to Alexander. "Earth to Sophia," Elena waved a hand in front of her face. "You've been a million miles away all evening. Is everything okay?" Sophia hugged her sister impulsively. "Everything's more than okay. The development project that was threatening Puerto Viejo? It's being completely reimagined. Our home is safe and it's going to thrive." Elena's eyes widened. "What? How?" "It's a long story," Sophia smiled. "But the short version is, sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they choose to do the right thing even when it's the harder path. Does this have anything to do with the mysterious Alexander you mentioned might come to the wedding?" Elena teased. "The one you've been texting all evening?" Sophia blushed. "He's different from what I first thought. He's trying to change things to make his company a force for good instead of destruction. And he's offered me a job to help make it happen." "And?" Elena pressed. "Are you going to take it?" Sophia looked out the restaurant's window at the New York skyline. 24 hours ago, these towers had seemed like symbols of everything that threatened her way of life. Now they represented possibility, the chance to protect other communities, to prove that progress didn't have to mean destruction. "I think," Sophia said slowly, "I think sometimes life gives you a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. And when that happens, you have to be brave enough to say yes." Her phone lit up with another message from Alexander. "Just reviewed the first draft of the community partnership agreements. Your father's inn will be our pilot project if he's willing. We'll prove this can work, Sophia, together." Elena read the message over her shoulder and smiled knowingly. Sounds like this is about more than just business. Sophia thought about the way Alexander had looked at her in the boardroom, the genuine emotion in his voice when he'd given credit to her for their success. "Maybe," she admitted, "but right now the most important thing is making this project work. Puerto Viejo needs to be just the beginning." Elena's wedding was everything a celebration of love should be. The historic Manhattan church glowed with candlelight, and flowers lined every pew. As Sophia stood beside her sister in her bridesmaid's dress, she couldn't help glancing toward the back of the church, where Alexander sat, looking impossibly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. Throughout the ceremony, their eyes kept meeting, across the space, sharing secret smiles that spoke of their shared victory and something more, something growing between them that neither had dared to name yet. When the priest pronounced Elena and her new husband married, Sophia felt tears in her eyes, but they weren't just for her sister's happiness. At the reception, held in a beautifully restored historic hotel, Sophia was busy with her maid of honor, duties when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Alexander holding out his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with warmth she'd never seen during their first meetings. On the dance floor, as a slow song played, Sophia felt herself relaxing into his arms. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said softly. "And?" His hand was warm against her back, steadying her as they moved to the music. "I want to make sure we do this right," she replied. "Not just for Puerto Viejo, but as a model for how development should work everywhere. No more communities destroyed in the name of progress." Alexander's smile was gentle. "That's not a yes or no." "It's a yes," Sophia looked up at him, "but with conditions. I need full authority to protect the community's interests, and I want to establish a foundation, funded by a percentage of the project's profits, to help other communities facing similar challenges." "Already done," Alexander said, surprising her. "I had the lawyers draft the paperwork this morning. The Sofia Martinez Community Preservation Foundation will be announced next week." Sophia missed a step, stunned. "You named it after me." "You're the heart of this new vision," Alexander said simply. "Everything I'm trying to build, everything I'm trying to become, started with you showing me a better way." Before Sophia could respond, Eleanor appeared beside them, her wedding dress sparkling in the ballroom lights. "Sorry to interrupt, but Sofia, Mama and Papa want to talk to you. They're on video call from Puerto Viejo." In a quiet corner of the reception, Sofia found her parents' excited faces on her phone screen. "Mi hija," her father said, his voice full of emotion. "We just received the new partnership proposal from Karim International. Is this real?" "It's real, Papa," Sofia assured him. "The Villa Marina will be the flagship property in the new development model. Alexander wants to show the world how luxury and local culture can enhance each other." "Alexander, eh?" Her mother's knowing smile made Sofia blush. "He seems different from what you first told us." "He is different," Sofia said softly, glancing across the room where Alexander was deep in conversation with Elena's new husband. "He's trying to change things, to make his father's company into something better." After ending the call, Sofia found herself on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the city lights. Alexander joined her, placing his jacket around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Your sister's husband told me something interesting," he said, "about how the hotel we're in was almost demolished 20 years ago. The developers wanted to build a modern high-rise, but instead they restored it, preserved its character. Now it's one of the most successful properties in the city." Sofia leaned slightly against him. "Another case study for our community preservation model?" "Exactly, but also..." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "It made me think about how sometimes the most valuable things are the ones we almost lose, the things we have to fight to preserve." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Sofia, I know we have to keep things professional. The project has to come first. But I can't pretend I don't feel something more when I'm with you." Sofia's heart raced, but she forced herself to think clearly. "What about Marcus? He's still a threat to everything we're trying to build." "Marcus filed his resignation this morning," Alexander revealed. "He's joining a competitor, which honestly might be better for everyone. He can pursue his vision of development, and we can pursue ours." Just then, the wedding DJ's voice floated out to the terrace. "And now, we're going to slow things down with a special request. The opening notes of an old Spanish love song, one Sofia's parents used to dance to in their inn's courtyard, filled the air." Alexander's eyes lit up with recognition. "Your sister might have helped me with this one," he admitted, pulling Sofia close. "Dance with me." As they swayed together under the stars, the music wrapping around them like a warm embrace, Sofia realized something. In trying to save her community, she'd found not just a powerful ally, but someone who understood her heart, someone who was willing to risk everything to build something beautiful. 3 months after Elena's wedding, Puerto Viejo was buzzing with activity. The morning sun sparkled off the ocean as Sofia walked through the town square, now enhanced with new locally crafted benches and restored colonial architecture. She stopped to chat with Mrs. Rodriguez, who was arranging fresh flowers in front of her newly renovated cafe. "The new outdoor seating is perfect," the older woman beamed. "Yesterday, I had tourists from 3 different countries all sharing. Coffee and my special empanadas, just like the old days, but better." Sofia smiled, remembering the heated community meetings where they debated every detail of the renovation plans. Alexander had attended them all, not as a CEO imposing his will, but as a partner learning from the community. His humility and genuine desire to understand had gradually won over even the most skeptical residents. Speaking of Alexander, she spotted him emerging from the Villa Marina, engaged in animated conversation with her father. Over the past months, the two men had developed an unexpected bond, spending hours discussing everything from sustainable building materials to the history of Puerto Viejo's fishing industry. "Sofia," Alexander called out when he saw her, his face lighting up the way it always did in her presence. "Your father's been sharing some brilliant ideas for the cultural center. We need to adjust the plans." She joined them, noticing the rolled-up blueprints under Alexander's arm. He looked different here in Puerto Viejo, more relaxed in casual linen shirts and pants, his usual perfect hair slightly tousled by the sea breeze. The change wasn't just external. She'd watched him transform. Over these months, rediscovering joy in creating something meaningful rather than just profitable. Mihija, her father said proudly, Alexander understands what we've been trying to tell developers for years. The soul of Puerto Viejo isn't in fancy buildings, it's in our stories, our traditions. That's why the cultural center needs to be more than just a museum, Alexander explained eagerly. We're redesigning it as a living workspace where artisans can demonstrate their crafts, teach classes, sell directly to visitors. Real interaction, not just display cases. Sophia's heart swelled, seeing their shared enthusiasm. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Her face fell as she read it. What's wrong? Alexander asked, immediately alert to her change in mood. Marcus, Sophia said grimly. He's been meeting with some of the bigger property owners in the next town over, promising them the kind of development we rejected here. Alexander's jaw tightened. He's trying to create competition, force us to change course. That's not all, Sophia showed him the message. He's spreading rumors that our project is behind schedule, over budget. Some of our investors are getting nervous. To her surprise, Alexander's face remained calm. Actually, this might be exactly what we needed. What do you mean? Remember that investment group from Europe, the one specializing in sustainable tourism? They've been waiting for proof that our model works before committing. He took her hand. Come with me, I need to show you something. They walked to the newly constructed pier, where local fishing boats now shared space with sleek water taxis. Alexander pointed to where tourists were eagerly buying fresh catches directly from the fishermen, taking photos, learning about traditional fishing methods. Look at the interaction, he said softly. The authentic experience is being created. This is what modern travelers want, Sophia. Not another soulless resort, but real connection. He pulled out his tablet, showing her the latest financial reports. Our occupancy rates are already higher than projected. The average visitor stay is 2 days longer than in comparable luxury resorts. And most importantly, local business revenue has increased by 40%. Sophia's father, who had followed them to the pier, spoke up. Last week, a magazine writer stayed at the Villa Marina. She said she'd never experienced anything like it. Luxury amenities combined with real community connection. Her article comes out next month. That's why Marcus's plan will fail, Alexander said confidently. He's fighting yesterday's battle. The future of hospitality isn't about replacing communities. It's about elevating them. Just then, a group of children ran past them on the pier, playing with handmade wooden boats, a tradition that had nearly been lost, but was now being taught in weekly workshops at the cultural center. Their laughter carried on the sea breeze, a sound that would have been silenced if the original development plans had proceeded. Sophia looked at Alexander, seeing in his eyes the same emotion. She felt pride in what they'd created together, and something deeper, something that had grown alongside their shared vision. He pulled her close, both of them watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors over their reimagined Puerto Viejo. You know, Alexander murmured, I used to think success meant building the biggest, most expensive resorts. But standing here, seeing all this, he gestured to the vibrant scene around them. I finally understand what real wealth looks like. Sophia leaned into him, thinking about how far they'd come from that first meeting on the plane. We're not just building hotels, she said softly. We're building futures, preserving pasts, creating something that will last long after we're gone. As if to emphasize her words, the evening church bells began to ring, their sound unchanged for centuries, now complementing rather than competing, with the gentle hum of modern life in Puerto Viejo. It was a perfect symbol of what they'd achieved, a harmony between progress and preservation, between luxury and authenticity, between two people from very different worlds who had found their way to a shared dream. 1 year after the transformation of Puerto Viejo began, the town was hosting its most significant event yet, the International Sustainable Tourism Conference. The same boardroom members who had once doubted Alexander's vision were now walking through the streets, witnessing firsthand the success of their revolutionary development model. The Villa Marina, beautifully restored but maintaining its historic charm, served as the conference's headquarters. In the inn's courtyard, now an elegant blend of traditional architecture and modern comfort, Sofia stood before a gathering of industry leaders, her presence confident and passionate. "What you see here in Puerto Viejo isn't just a success story," she addressed the crowd. "It's a blueprint for the future. In the past year, our community's economy has grown by 60%, but more importantly, we've preserved our soul." Alexander watched from the side, pride evident in his eyes. The man who had once seen only profit margins now understood the true meaning of value. The transformation of Puerto Viejo had transformed him as well, softening his edges while strengthening his convictions. As Sofia continued her presentation, Eleanor, visiting from New York with her husband, nudged Alexander gently. "Have you asked her yet?" He patted his pocket nervously, feeling the small box hidden there. After the conference, everything has to be perfect. The audience broke into applause as Sofia concluded her speech. Various development companies were already approaching them about implementing similar models in other communities. The Sofia Martinez Community Preservation Foundation had received applications from towns across 3 continents, all seeking to protect their heritage while embracing sustainable progress. Later that evening, as the conference attendees enjoyed a beachfront dinner featuring local cuisine, Alexander led Sofia away from the crowd. They walked along the shore, where the newly constructed boardwalk harmoniously connected the traditional fishing pier with modern amenities. "Remember that first flight?" Alexander asked, stopping at a spot where the setting sun painted the ocean in brilliant golds and purples. "When you fell asleep on my shoulder." Sofia laughed softly. "I was so embarrassed, and then terrified when I discovered who you were and what you planned to do to my home." "You changed everything," Alexander said, turning to face her. "My vision, my values, my heart." He took both her hands in his. "I had success, but you showed me how to have purpose." Behind them, the sounds of the dinner celebration mingled with the gentle crash of waves. String lights twinkled along the hay. Boardwalk and the evening sea breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the Villa Marina's gardens. "Sofia Martinez," Alexander's voice was thick with emotion as he dropped to one knee. "You didn't just help me save Puerto Viejo, you helped me save myself. Will you continue our journey together? Will you marry me?" The ring he presented was perfect. A traditional design reimagined by local artisans, just like everything else they'd created together. Tears sparkled in Sofia's eyes as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times. "Yes." Their kiss was interrupted by cheers. Their families had gathered quietly to witness the moment. Sofia's parents, Elena and her husband, even the board members and conference attendees, all celebrated together. The elderly board member, who had first supported their vision, raised a glass. "To the future of Karim, international, and to love that builds instead of destroys." Marcus, who had been invited to the conference as a gesture of reconciliation, approached the couple. His own development projects had struggled as travelers increasingly sought authentic experiences over artificial luxury. "You were right," he admitted to Alexander. "Both of you. I'm ready to learn if you're willing to teach." A month later, Alexander and Sofia stood in the Villa Marina's renovated courtyard again, this time for their wedding. The ceremony combined the elegance of his world with the warm traditions of hers. Guests from both their lives witnessed their union, a testament to the bridges they had built. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Sofia looked around at what they had created together, not just the physical transformation of Puerto Viejo, but the change in people's hearts and minds. Their love story had become more than just their own. It had become a symbol of how progress and preservation could dance together, how different worlds could merge to create something beautiful. "What are you thinking?" Alexander murmured as they swayed to the music. "About all the other Puerto Viejos out there," Sofia replied. "All the communities that need what we've discovered here." Alexander smiled, pulling her closer. "Then we'll help them, one town at a time, together." As the evening unfolded, with laughter and music filling the air, the lights of Puerto Viejo twinkled like stars fallen to earth. The old church bells rang out in harmony with modern melodies, and the sea breeze carried the promises of tomorrow. In this magical place where past and future had learned to dance together, two hearts that had once been worlds apart now beat as one, ready to continue building dreams that would last for generations to come. The end. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sophia and Alexander has touched your hearts and shown you how love can build bridges between different worlds. Their journey reminds us that true progress doesn't mean erasing the past, but honoring it while embracing the future. If this tale of transformation and romance has moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that celebrate the power of love and community. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful narratives to life. Join us tomorrow for another extraordinary story that will capture your imagination and touch your soul.